After much excitement and hype, my most anticipated game of 2022, the Callisto Protocol, has finally released, and I think it's really great. It provides an intense survival horror experience along with some solid combat, a decent story, and incredible audio and visual fidelity. Now, if you've paid attention to this game's launch, you'll know that it was hammered with middling to bad reviews, many of which I fervently disagree with. I just want to remind everyone that this is my opinion on the Callisto Protocol based on my experience with the game. It's not a perfect experience by any means, and you should not go into this expecting something that will rival or even surpass its predecessor, the Dead Space series. However, if you enter the Callisto Protocol with an open mind and understand that this is a very different and unique take on survival horror, you will come away from it very pleased, as I was. Even though the game definitely has some issues, I am wholeheartedly recommending this to anyone who might be interested in playing. So without further introduction, let me tell you why you should play the Callisto Protocol. Let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, the PC version of the Callisto Protocol had inexcusable performance problems at launch. The game runs on Unreal Engine and encounters the exact same issue that many other Unreal games inherently have, that being an awful stuttering that will freeze the game repeatedly for seconds and sometimes minutes at a time. It makes for a frustrating first impression, and it also damages any potential immersion you would feel while playing the game. This has become an increasingly irritating problem, especially for those who consider the PC to be their primary gaming platform like myself. PC ports are largely ignored by the publishers and developers to cater to the console market, where most people play their games. However, the PC market has expanded exponentially over the past several years, and more people than ever are making the jump over to PC gaming. The fact that developers and publishers continue to ignore this burgeoning demographic is quite frankly insulting, and it always results in a launch like the one that the Callisto Protocol had. Now, the head of development on the game, as well as the studio head of Striking Distance, Glenn Schofield, did come out and publicly apologize for the state of the game at launch, and mentioned that the stuttering issues were caused by a wrong file that was patched into the game prior to launch. Glenn described it as a quote-unquote clerical error, but the fact remains, the Callisto Protocol should not have launched in this state, and the fact that it did led to extremely negative reception by both critics and the gaming audience at large. The Callisto Protocol hovered around 30% mostly negative ratings on its Steam store page at launch, which caused a disastrous drop in stock price for the South Korean-based publisher Krafton. In addition to this, the poor reception of the game may very well have killed any chance at seeing a sequel, something that I will talk about more further into this video. Thankfully now, around 2 to 3 weeks after its launch, the Callisto Protocol is in much better shape on PC. I will give credit where it is due. The team at Striking Distance Studios have been incredibly quick about fixing the game's performance problems, and they have also publicly stated that they will be addressing many of the inherent design flaws that the game has been criticized for. For me personally, the patches issued by the developers have really helped to make my experience with the Callisto Protocol much better and have made me more forgiving of any shortcomings. It's also important to remember that this is a newly formed studio that is launching their debut title, so I'll cut them a little slack, but only a little. Now, with that out of the way, how is the game itself? Is it good or is it bad? Well, I think it's actually great, but that opinion hinges on a couple of things. Firstly, it's important to know exactly how this game was designed. Many games are designed in a way that you as the player can play them however you would like, using whatever tools you have at your disposal. This is the primary reason why I love Arcane Studios and their games, is because they allow for that level of player freedom. Then there are other games where the developers have designed it in such a way that it can only be played according to their vision for the game and how a player should experience it according to them. Many of the greatest games of all time fit this description, as there is only one valid way to play. The one that jumps immediately to the forefront of my mind is Doom Eternal. That game was specifically designed to where you would need to constantly swap your currently equipped weapon in order to deal with multiple different enemy types in a single encounter. This is pretty much the only valid and efficient way to progress through Doom Eternal's complex and varied combat scenarios. If you tried to play Doom Eternal any other way, you were bound to struggle repeatedly. The Callisto protocol is very much designed in the same way, and it's no mistake why I mentioned Doom Eternal specifically, as I think that the Callisto protocol mirrors much of the design philosophy of that game in regards to its combat mechanics. The Callisto Protocol is the first and only survival horror game I've seen that focuses almost exclusively on melee combat for the duration of the campaign. Melee is usually either an afterthought or a last resort when it comes to survival horror. Not so here, as even though you do get access to ranged firearms throughout the game, melee combat is the primary means of dispatching your grotesque foes. An encounter usually begins with an enemy taking the first swipe at you, and this is where the unique dodge mechanic comes into play. As an enemy is preparing to strike, you hold either your left movement key or your right movement key to dodge out of the way seamlessly. There is no timing window for the dodge. You simply need to hold either button, or in my case, a key on the keyboard, to avoid an enemy's attack. After you've dodged, you can follow it up with a combo of damaging hits, which, upon ending the combo, opens up your enemy to attack you again, and the pattern repeats itself. It might sound repetitive, but it's actually incredibly fun and intuitive the more you get used to this odd, back and forth dance of death. This is the part of the game that I have seen the most criticism for, other than the aforementioned performance woes, and I have to say, I really don't feel that the large majority of these criticisms are coming from a place of understanding and mastering the combat mechanics. Many reviewers say that the game is simply too difficult, to which I say, try to understand the way the combat flows, and how to best engage each different enemy type. Others have said that in one-on-one encounters, the melee combat is very fluid, while it becomes janky and very unruly when fighting multiple enemies at once. To this, I would say, use all of the tools the game gives to you. There are many different ways to approach a combat scenario in the Callisto protocol based on what tools you have available. You have your trusty stun baton, which can be upgraded to deal more damage and even cut through an enemy's block, allowing for a longer combo. You also have your ranged weapons in the form of fairly conventional firearms, pistols, shotguns, and an assault rifle towards the latter half of the game. The final tool in your arsenal is the grip, a telekinetic device attached to your arm that allows you to lift either objects to throw at enemies like explosive canisters, or you can lift the enemies themselves and toss them into environmental hazards placed around the environment. The grip can also be used to push enemies away to give yourself some much needed breathing room during combat, or you can pull enemies towards you to close the gap and finish them off once they have been sufficiently weakened through other means. Much like Doom Eternal, you have many different enemy types to contend with in the Callisto protocol, and many of the combat areas let you survey your surroundings, and this allows you as the player to properly gauge how many enemies are present, how many environmental hazards you can use, and also how much ammo and resources you have available that you can use. There is a greater degree of thought that you need to put into each combat scenario, and I just don't feel like the critics reviewing the game fully understood this. This is how Glenn Schofield and the team at Striking Distance designed their game, and how they envisioned that it would be played. You can certainly try to engage multiple enemies at a time with only your melee attacks, but you will quickly become frustrated discredited like many critics were, and you might even unfairly brush this game off completely at that point. Again, I must say this, you have to keep in mind how the developers are trying to guide you as a player during the game, and what kind of experience they want you to have, not the experience that you personally feel you should be having, regardless of the developer's intent. I find the combat in the Callisto Protocol to be very engaging and intense, much more so than how I remembered the Dead Space series being. The focus on melee combat makes each encounter deeply personal and also grossly unsettling, as even though you don't want to be anywhere near these disgusting abominations, you are forced into close quarters with them, which makes playing the Callisto Protocol incredibly unique among its contemporaries in the survival horror genre. The guns also feel great to use, and the dismemberment of each enemy with bullets fired adds another level of visceral carnage to the proceedings. The grip adds a whole other dimension to combat as well, giving you more equal footing with your opponents, and also providing some of the most cathartic moments in the game. Throwing your enemies into spiked walls or spinning fans over and over never gets old, let me tell you. There is also an upgrade tree for each piece of gear that you acquire throughout the campaign, and many of these upgrades change the playing field drastically and give you an even bigger upper hand in the latter half of the game. You upgrade your weapons and gear by acquiring credits you can scavenge from corpses that you can stomp, another Dead Space throwback, or by combing through lockers and chests scattered throughout the environment. Inventory management also plays a pretty heavy part in the moment-to-moment gameplay of the Callisto Protocol. Do I carry this health injector that I may or may not need for this next room, or do I grab just a few more bullets to have in reserve? It adds another layer of tension in a game that is already dripping in it. The second reason I think this game is great, and why I have that opinion, is that even though the Callisto Protocol was developed by many of the original visionaries behind the Dead Space franchise, this game manages to set itself apart from Dead Space in ways that I think are wholly unique, and not at all what people were expecting leading up to launch. Everyone, myself included, was expecting the Callisto Protocol to be the quote-unquote spiritual successor to Dead Space, providing us with a similar experience we had playing the original Dead Space all those years ago, but with the advantages of new advancements in next-gen consoles and PCs. What we actually got was a game that harkened back to Dead Space in smaller and more subtle ways, but not outright copying or mimicking what had come before. The Callisto Protocol forges its own path in the survival horror genre, for better or for worse, and it's important to keep this in mind if you do plan on trying it out. One of the ways it does this is by providing, in my opinion, a decidedly less quote-unquote scary experience than its inspiration. The original Dead Space is infamous for being one of the scariest horror games ever created, with many people having never finished to completion simply due to being too terrified. Now, the Callisto Protocol is a scary game, but just not in the same way that Dead Space was. It relies far more on tension and constantly keeping you on the edge of your seat, not quite knowing what could be around the next corner, creating an experience that I won't be forgetting anytime soon. Sure, it also has its fair share of cliched jump scares as well, very few of which actually do the job they're supposed to, but some of them did elicit a genuine reaction from me while playing. Much of the horror in the Callisto Protocol actually comes from the gross-out death animations and overdoses of gore that flood your screen with gut-wrenching imagery. I like to think I have a pretty strong stomach, but some of the stuff here twisted my inside into knots in a good way. Okay, we've spoken about the performance, the gameplay and criticisms, and the often unfair comparisons to Dead Space, but what about the story of the Callisto Protocol? Once again, I think it's much better than many people have given it credit for. It's not groundbreaking storytelling by any means, but I also feel like it does the story and narrative far more justice than what I remember from playing the original Dead Space. The protagonist you control is Jacob Lee, a cargo pilot on a mission to deliver medical supplies on behalf of the UJC, or United Jupiter Corporation. On a routine cargo run, his ship is hijacked by members of a civilian resistance group known as the Outer Way, and the ship crash lands on Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons, as a result. Jacob is swiftly taken in by the armed security forces and thrown unceremoniously into Black Iron Prison. As Jacob awakes in his cell, all hell has broken loose, and the inmates and security forces have begun to mutate into horrific abominations known as the biophage. Your ultimate goal is to escape the moon of Callisto, but Jacob soon discovers that there is far more lurking under the surface of Black Iron Prison than previously thought. The narrative in the Callisto Protocol doesn't break new ground in any way for the survival horror genre, but it does manage to tell an interesting and intriguing story as you unravel the mysteries surrounding the viral outbreak and the secrets of Callisto itself. It helps that Striking Distance Studios assembled a great all-star cast in the form of Josh Duhamel as Jacob, as well as Karen Fukuhara and Sam Witwer as supplementary characters. Everyone does great work with the material, and Sam Witwer in particular is clearly having the time of his life, playing the sinister Captain Ferris of the prison guard. If you've played the Dead Space games, there is familiar territory that is retread here, but the Callisto Protocol still manages to separate itself from Dead Space by telling an interesting story that I feel rivals that of Isaac Clarke's journey aboard the USG Ishimura. The motion capture and facial capture for each of the lead actors is what really sells you on their performances and the narrative as a whole. I don't know what sort of technical wizardry Striking Distance employed here, but this is beyond uncanny valley levels of realism. I mean, you can even see the sweat running down Jacob's neck. The level of detail put into these characters and their animations is nothing short of revolutionary for the games industry, and hopefully we will see more games follow suit in the future in regards to this degree of realistic human animation. This goes hand in hand with the overall visual design of the Callisto Protocol, which is astoundingly beautiful. This is easily one of the best looking games I've ever played, period. Texture quality, shadows and lighting, the particle effects, especially in the outdoor sections on the surface of the moon, are wonders to behold, and I have to commend the environmental artists at Striking Distance because this game will no doubt be held up as an example for others to follow in regards to visual quality. The last aspect of the Callisto Protocol that brings it home is the audio design. The audio engineers at Striking Distance used what is called the apprehension engine, a strange contraption that can create some of the most alien and spine-tingling sounds you've ever heard. Cautiously making your way through each area, you are surrounded at all times by sounds that will keep you on edge and in a constant state of alert. The grinding of machinery, the gasp of a pipe, the squelching of viral deformations along the walls and ceilings, not to mention the clanging of the infected following you in the ventilation ducts. All of these sounds combine to create an unrivaled audio experience in survival horror. Play this game with headphones in a room that is as dark as you can possibly make it, and thank me for the stained pants later. All of these are the different pillars that make the Callisto Protocol, in my opinion, a great survival horror experience, and I would absolutely recommend this game to you at full price. Now, your mileage may vary, and your opinion on what is a good game length to price ratio may differ from mine. The Callisto Protocol is a full-priced AAA title at $60, at least on PC, and it can be completed in approximately 8 to 12 hours, depending on if you explore each chapter fully and discover the hidden side routes and collectible audio logs. For some, this may not be worth the price of admission. For me, it was absolutely worth my time, and I'm glad I was able to experience this game. As I grow older, my time becomes far more valuable, especially in regards to games, and quite frankly, I would prefer a linear, single-player, narrative-driven survival horror game as opposed to a bloated, 60 30+ hour open world game that wastes my time with menial tasks and side objectives, but that's just my own personal taste. Without spoiling anything, the game does leave plenty of room for a possible sequel at some point in the future, which I would personally love to see, as it would give Striking Distance the opportunity to improve the foundation that has been set up here. I did mention earlier though that due to the negative reception and stock price drop for the publisher Krafton, the chances of us actually getting a sequel are slightly lesser than what they would have been had the game been more well received. I do hope the Callisto Protocol finds an audience because I would love to see this story continue, and I would also love to see these initial gameplay concepts and ideas further expanded upon. Enough about what I think though. What do you think about the Callisto Protocol? Have you played it yet, or has this video convinced you to try it out? Did you enjoy it, or did you find it to be disappointing like many others did? Sound off in the comments down below and let's discuss. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to click the like button and share this video with others who might be interested in the Callisto Protocol. It really helps the channel to get noticed. Consider subscribing to the channel for more content like this, and be sure to hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And remember that the outsider walks among us. Thanks for watching, everyone.